Hey, this is a quick video on upgrading the diverter valve in your M235i. The part is the same for all N55 motors, but the installation difficulty varies depending on which car you have and which drivetrain. I have a rear-wheel drive M235i and it was an absolute nightmare, so I would imagine that the X-Drive model is a lot worse, if not more impossible, without removing a ton of crap. So this isn't really a full tutorial, this is more of an informational video with pictures and video of my installation to show you the obstacles and tools you need and such. I first watched a video where a guy installs it in a 3 Series and it looks considerably easier than it was for me in my 2 Series, which makes sense because the 3 Series is a bigger car, so there's more room. I'll put a link to that video in the video description so you can go check it out since that one is a full tutorial. First, you start off by removing the skid plates. That's pretty easy. Now you should be able to see the diverter valve, kinda. It's buried up there behind a whole bunch of crap. On the 2 Series, it's just in a really terrible spot. The subframe brace is in the way, the power steering rack is in the way, the water pump is in the way, the water lines are in the way, the hot side charge pipe's in the way, an oil line gets in the way of removing the top bolt for the diverter valve. Pretty much everything is working against you for this installation. The Go Fast Bits instructions are a little frustrating for an M235i owner because the pictures they show you are for like a Ford Focus ST or something and it looks absolutely trivial. So I removed the bottom 2 bolts for the water pump, which requires external torque sockets. Usually they start with an E and then the number, for the torque size. I got mine on Amazon, and if I can remember to, I'll put a link in the video description to those. The video I watched showed that once you remove those 2 bolts, you could push the water pump like completely down and out of the way. But on the M235i, there's also a top bolt, and it's basically impossible to reach it because, yeah, you just can't get to it. You'll see for yourself. So removing the bottom 2 bolts does let you move it around some, which helped, but yeah, it doesn't help much. So what I basically did is used a lot of force to move it out of the way as much as I could, and then I used joined cable ties to get enough length, obviously, to like strap it to other parts of the car to move it and hold it out of the way, because it took quite a bit of force to move it with the top bolt still connected. It wasn't much, but it did help a little bit with making room for socket extensions and U-joints and such. But I think at one point I had to undo it because it helped with the water pump in its original location for one of the other bolts or something. I don't remember. It's a pain though. So the bottom left Allen bolt was a pain, but not impossibly hard. I bought a cheap set of Harbor Freight Allen keys, and then I had to saw the shorter end even shorter to get enough clearance. There's only about 45 degrees of space, so it took a really, really long time and some really sore arms just to get that one bolt out. The bottom right one I got out with a janky combination of socket extensions of varying lengths and a U-joint in the middle. It wasn't an ideal angle, but I made it work. The top bolt is definitely the hardest. It's almost completely out of sight depending on which direction you're looking at it from, and above it is what looks like an oil line for the turbo coming out of the block. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but that's, if I had to take a guess, that's what I would guess it is. So you can get to it, but your socket or extension will rub that oil line or whatever it is, so that's kind of unfortunate. I had to use several socket extensions and a U-joint and accessed it almost directly from in front of the car, basically against the radiator fan. So you're gonna need several different lengths of extensions that you can join up in different combinations to get the perfect length for this. So the more socket extensions you have available, the better off you're gonna be. But man, what a pain. It's like BMW designed this part to only be replaced if you pull the turbo completely out of the car. So you think for something that would, be impossible to replace, that they would have gone with something better than a rubber diaphragm that can crack and dry out. Anyway, this angle still wasn't perfect, especially with that oil line thing in the way, so I had to put a lot of pressure on it to make sure I didn't strip the head of the bolt out. Some of my pictures might make it look like it's really open, but it's just because I took the picture up close, and let me tell you, it is not open. It's really tight. It's on the bottom of the turbo, on the side facing the engine block. The turbo manifold is directly above it. The hot side charge pipe blocks access to it from the left side, and there's almost no way to get to the bolts to remove the charge pipe, so it's a nightmare. It honestly took me a good 8+ hours to get this done. Once it was out, upgrading the internals was cake. I used painter's tape to hold the assembly together because nothing actually holds it together. Basically the bolts that go through it that screwed into the turbo hold the top and bottom assemblies together, so that's why I used the painter's tape. The piston inside is obviously like a high tolerance machine part, so you don't want to drop it because then you'll ding it and then it's not going to work right. So that's why you definitely want to use painter's tape or something and keep it together, because if the piston falls out and hits the ground, there's a good chance that you're going to damage it. The piston at the top could also fall out, and that just sits on top of another spring. So yeah, that was really fun holding that in place with my finger while the painter's tape is holding both halves together, while getting it up through the labyrinth underneath the car back up into its home in the turbo without falling apart, while keeping the piston in place and getting the first bolt started so it stays there. It was, man, it was fun. No, it really wasn't fun. But once it's in, it's just the nightmare process in the reverse order. I honestly think that anyone considering this should just pay a shop to do a pure stage 2 turbo upgrade, and then while the turbo's out, have them do this upgrade. It'd just be like a 2-minute job if the turbo wasn't in the car. Well, I hope this prepares any brave souls who are considering attempting this on their M235i. If I could go back in time, I'd probably consider doing a turbo upgrade and paying a shop to do it. My hands are bright red and had tons of cuts and bruises that showed up the next day. Good times. Sweat and blood equity, right? As for testing afterwards, it works great. Throttle response does seem more immediate, probably due to this optional spring thing that they include in the instructions that I really didn't read into much. Who knows? Sound of the valve's different now too. The factory is a rubber diaphragm, and the upgrade is a metal piston that's pretty similar to your average blow-off valve. So sometimes you end up with a sound that's closer to what you typically associate with a blow-off valve. At low RPMs, the high boost pressure gets you kind of a cooing sound, like a mourning dove or something. Any other time, you just get regular whooshing sounds. Now, I should state before I end this that a seasoned mechanic might have tips and tricks to do this more easily. Maybe they have better tools to get up there, better U-joints, 90-degree adapters, I'm not sure. But nothing was really immediately obvious to me. And if you paid a shop to do it, I don't think it would be the 7 hours of shop time or whatever it took me to do it, because I spent a lot of time scratching my head trying to think of ideas of how to get some of this crap out, because I just really don't have a lot to work with when you're standing on there looking at this tight spot. I think a typical shop would probably scratch your head for about 5 minutes and then decide, yep, we're gonna have to remove a bunch of crap, and they'd probably honestly start removing, you know, they'd drain the radiator system, pull the water pump out, remove the power steering rack, and then they'd have easy access to it. Without that stuff in the way, this would be trivial. It's literally 3 hex bolts. Well, I think it's enough for this one. This isn't really a tutorial, more so than like a warning, I guess, that this is not a fun one, so, you know, proceed with caution. Let me know if you have any questions. See you in the next video.